know that many of our children have suffered greatly through the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah.
So do you see any correlations between your work with veterans and what's happening now with the younger generation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have a whole generation of children in moral distress. Moral injury is part of the human condition, and moral distress, which can lead to moral injury. I think a lot of people are feeling moral distress right now. And if it doesn't get taken care of, it can actually descend into something pretty serious that can wreck your life. Children pick up on the feelings of their parents. And so when their parents are anxious, fearful, stressed, angry, all of those feelings, children absorb those feelings. They're just like, they have to figure out how to be human beings in the world, and they learn from their parents. And feelings are crucial to being a human being. And so children can be quite distressed even when they didn't have the experience. But they also themselves have been isolated, which is really a terrible thing to do to anybody, because they couldn't go to school and see their friends and their favorite teachers and all of that. And that kind of embodiedness, that sense of connection through a living presence, is really also part of the developmental process. And a lot of kids have just not had enough of that in the last few years. So I think that if they're upset, feeling terrible, depressed, or angry, that's just totally understandable.
And a lot of professionals, a lot of educators are saying that children are showing us the signs of their anxiety, and we see that manifesting in different ways with behavior issues in schools, violence, and other stress factors playing out. Are we doing enough to address this problem right now? You had said if we don't address it, then there could be dire consequences.
I think that's right. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is how schools have been escalating the fear factor of school around the shootings, the active shooter drills that they do in schools. Because especially for younger children, they can't really emotionally tell the difference between a drill and the real thing. So I've talked to parents myself, friends who have young children who come back from one of those days, and their children are just not themselves. They're just like deeply upset by the drills, just the drills. And I'm not sure they're actually useful, partly because they escalate the level of fear of going to school. By having people live out the feelings of having a shooter in the school. And the stats are that the shooters tend to be from the schools. So they've gone through the drills, they know where people are hiding. So I'm not sure it has very good prevention factor. They're just going to get information about what to do when they come into the school with a gun. So I think the drills are actually essential for teachers to understand how to protect the kids in their classrooms. But I'm not sure we should be pushing children through that kind of trauma and fear as a normal act of going to school.
And we've seen these drills increase from, my generation, where it was simply just a fire drill and then maybe a bomb threat, or, when I was in high school, to now something that's completely unrecognizable, with children hiding in closets underneath desks.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember nuclear war and hide under your desk. And of course, that was a useless piece of advice, and it just made you terrified. So I don't think it's very helpful. And I think if you have, I had a friend who's, her 5-year-old came home traumatized from an active shooter drill that she had to go through at school. And I think if you notice a behavior change that's pretty serious in a child that's come home from school, talk to them what happened, and help them process what happened to them in school. It may not be a drill, it may be somebody threatened them, or they're afraid of somebody in their class. But it's really, really important for parents to be sort of tuned in emotionally to their children. So when their children aren't feeling right, you give them a chance to talk about it and listen without trying to minimize or explain away or dismiss how they're feeling. Because often we don't want them to be anxious, so we try to tell them, no, it's really not that bad, or no, you'll feel better tomorrow, or that. that kind of erases them because it tells them, well, their feelings are appropriate. And just to let them really talk about how afraid, angry, upset, depressed they might be feeling makes them feel more real, and it validates them. And often when a child can actually talk, express how they're feeling, then you can move to problem solving. You can say, oh, I so hear you. I know it's really upsetting. I really empathize. And so what do you think we could do about it? How could we make it feel better to go to school? Or how could, the problem solve with them gives them, first of all, it validates how they're feeling, but it also says, maybe you could have more control over it. It gives them a sense of agency. And that's so important for people to feel. Any modicum of safety is that they have a little bit of control in their life.
Speaking of control, we lost a lot of our own control during the pandemic. You talked about the active shooter drills, but how has the pandemic, contributed to this sense of anxiety and fear and out of controlness that could affect our children?
Well, for the parents, if you had a job that made you afraid to come home because you might give your kids COVID, like if you worked in healthcare, or if you yourself felt anxious about getting sick, or I know so many parents who not only were trying to do full-time jobs, but also trying to do homeschool, and their Wi-Fi bandwidth would be completely used up because they had kids online and they were trying to do work, and a spouse online. And so there were all of these sort of not normal ways of operating that parents had to face. And so it's also important for parents to talk to other parents and share strategies, and also begin to feel a better sense of control over what's happening.
I found, even in my own personal life, when you talk to another parent, another mom, you realize that your child isn't the only one who's going through it.
Yeah.
And so it is helpful to get advice. Sometimes I think not only the children feel like they're in a silo, but sometimes parents can feel that isolation as well. And it can be overwhelming unless we openly discuss it.
Yeah. And the worst part of bad feelings is being socially isolated, because it makes you stew in those bad feelings. And the only way to get really to cope with them is to share it. And the empathy, actually part of the process of being connected to other people who are experiencing stress too, is that sharing your own stress, but also hearing other people's stress sort of takes you outside your own misery for a little bit. And that capacity to step outside the thing you're stewing in gives you some agency about dealing with it. That's not there when you're just stewing in those feelings.
So how should parents and young people prepare for this school year?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to actually talk about how your kids are feeling about going to school, because they may be really looking forward to getting out and being back with their friends, but they're going to face a new normal in which there's a shortage of teachers. Their favorite teacher may no longer be there. Some of their friends may have left, or had serious things happen to them. So just talk to them about what it's going to be like to go back and see how they're feeling. And even if they're excited, they may have anxieties underneath the excitement, and just sort of suss that out so that you're not blindsided when they come back and something terribly upsetting happened to them, that you didn't know that might happen to them.
Is it an ongoing conversation? Because and does that conversation change a bit depending on that grade level of your child?
Yeah, sure. And it's always a good idea anyway to check in when they come home, how you're doing. And if I think if they really believe you mean to ask the question, that you want a real answer, they'll tell you. If it's a sort of pro forma thing, they may just say fine. And sometimes it's when they say that, something really awful happened, but they don't want to talk about it. And yeah, you can give them a little time, but it's really, really important to check in with them on a regular basis.
Validate their feelings and actually, listen, take the time to absorb whatever they say.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that whole families can do together, is to learn the kind of stress lowering breathing. That some people call it mindfulness. That's a kind of long word for kids. We call it belly breathing, which is and it is breathing that's about your body. So it immediately puts them in their body, which is helpful. And then you do this, the deep inhale into your diaphragm, so your belly pooches out, and then you hold for about a second, and then you breathe out at twice the length of time as you breathe in. And it's that long exhale that lowers the cortisol in your body, because different parts of your brain operate the inhale and the exhale. It's a very strange thing. Your body knows what to do. Because when we breathe, stress breathing is when we're activated and we're breathing short, tight breaths up high. And that actually increases your stress. So to actually just change how you breathe can help you relax and handle stress better. With kids, you can do games like who can pooch their belly out the farthest, take the deepest breath, and make it fun for the little kids. But I think actually families that spend time learning to breathe together, that actually can calm down a situation where the tensions are beginning to escalate. And kids, I know they teach this in school sometimes, but I think it's actually important to repeat it daily as a kind of ritual habit, so that kids immediately can feel like, I'm getting upset, and I can breathe. So they feel control over how they're feeling, and they don't get out of control.
I mean, how do you reconcile that? You have spent your career studying the impacts of veterans who have been to war, and now see the same correlation with children who have just been home, have gone through this pandemic.
Yeah, well, the thing I think that's just true is it's not a disorder to feel the ways we're feeling. We're not crazy. We're not mental health cases. This life is chaotic. Reality can be frustrating and terrible. And so we have to figure out how to create spaces where we can imagine managing our world. And doing that, like with breathing, or with just having times like to talk that are set aside, that are not part of the chaos of the world, but as our way to connect to other people and begin to process how we're feeling. And that helps us imagine being better. It helps us imagine maybe next time we'll do it better. Those spaces are really, really important for us to manage the reality and the chaos of the world, because we can't stop pandemics. We can't stop everything about climate change or war or those kinds of things. And so it's really, really important to have those kinds of spaces that help us hold our hearts and souls and minds in a way that makes us feel connected to other people and sort of pull out our best selves.
How is this school year different? I mean, the pandemic, I think, changed everything about school. And so now that we're in person, things are starting to get back to a new sense of normal. What does that look like here?
I think you actually defined it as a new sense of normal, because there was so much that we learned during the pandemic, and so much that we learned even the first year students started coming back into the building. And so making sure that our young people, the instruction looks different, that students don't have to be in a classroom from 8 to 3:30. We've learned that they can use technology to do a lot of their learning, and that we really can use DC and the community as a learning place for them. And so I think that's really important. Our class structure is changing, truly project-based learning. And you probably hear Jordan talk a little bit about some of the activities he'd do later, but really making sure it's hands-on, is applicable to real life, and that students are doing a lot of the heavy lifting themselves.
So not spending, the whole day in a classroom. So does that mean, like you said, excursions, doing remote work elsewhere? What does that look like?
It's a combination of all of those things. Our teachers are really planning to make sure that students are outside of the building. They're really planning to make sure that students are leading some of their learning, and that they're really working as facilitators rather than always having this direct instruction type of thing happening.
Why is that important?
I think it's important because that's how our young people learn, and that's how the real world operates. You know, we still have people who still haven't gone back to an office building and probably never will again. And they work with their colleagues all around the country, and they don't have to be face to face. And so I think it's really realistic in what we want our young people to do as they move into the world of work.
It's almost like accepting the changes that we've all gone through and adapting to it instead of saying, let's get back to what we remembered from pre-pandemic, because that doesn't exist anymore.
Absolutely. And you started to make me laugh when you said that, because our little book study this week was Who Moved My Cheese? And so I gave every staff member that book. And we really talked about how the targets have changed and how our young people have changed, and being willing to make sure that we change in our practices to meet the needs of our young people.
How does that translate to, paying attention to their social emotional needs, knowing that the pandemic has caused a lot of stress and anxiety?
Absolutely.
There was a recent report by MedStar Health that indicated 90% of parents are concerned about their child's mental health. And so how concerned are educators about filling the space with children with varying, concerns and stresses in their lives?
I think it's really important to all of our staff members and educators about our students' well-being, because their teaching and learning can't happen if they're not in sound mind. And so, I'm really excited about the work that Friendship has done with the wraparound services. Our team, our counselors, our school psychologists, our deans, our SST coordinator have really been working around the social emotional piece. So even this summer, we did a lot of home visits. We put plans in place for those students who we've already identified, over the past school year. We are really implementing the Joy Factor day one when students come into the building. We have groups that are coming up with, groups for students' needs. We have individual counseling, and we have partnered with a lot of organizations that come into our building and help to provide some of those services. Like, we know that if our young people, again, don't have those other issues that they're struggling with address, that teaching and learning just can't happen for them.
A doctor we just spoke to this morning who actually has been studying the impact that veterans faced coming back from war, right? And she's seeing that same kind of impact in our young people because they've been through so much trauma and isolation. And that she said it needs to be addressed,
Absolutely.
right? It has to be addressed, or else it can result in long-term damage.
Absolutely.
You said joy. What does that look like? What does that mean? And how do you spark joy in a child that's been through a lot?
I think it's, number one, giving them the ability to have those conversations. Each scholar's need is different. One could be, having one-on-one conversations. One could be being really active in the community because they were so self-isolated when they were at home by themselves. So it really depends on all of those things, but we've kind of looked at joy as, number one, how we address them and making sure that they know that they're important, being able to teach them how to self-advocate for themselves and identify and know who to go to when they need help, and also them being able to advocate for each other. Sometimes, young people won't identify that they need help, but their best friend knows it. And so all of those pieces come into place, and joy comes with knowing that I may be struggling, but there's other people here to help me and to walk along the way with me.
Not feeling like you're all by yourself in
Absolutely.
a silo. How has the pandemic impacted educators? I mean, we know we're facing a teacher shortage. The amount of work that educators had to do to make this happen, right? I mean, you just don't flip a switch. How has that been? I mean, how's your staff? How are you? Coming into this new school year, you have to take care of each other and not just the students.
We know across the country that some people have decided not to be educators anymore. We did not have a turnover rate, and I was really excited about that. Friendship did a lot of work in well-being of our staff members. There were a lot of workshops. Of course, the EAP services, for staff members who need counseling. We provided opportunities to have dialogue, to problem solve together. It was okay when, if your children came up with COVID, Friendship had a policy in place that you could go home and you could take care of your children. And again, because we know that teaching and learning can happen even remotely, there were different situations to support different staff members. So I think our staff members are excited about coming back to school. Of course, we don't know exactly what to expect, but we have planned on really moving forward and making sure that our students get what they need so that they can be successful in life.
I like that you said problem solving. That's a lot of what I heard from this doctor, right?
Yes.
She said problem solving. You know, you don't have to have the answers, but you need to be willing to have conversations and really listen and validate your scholars, your child's experience, and then figure out together, well, what do we do? Like, how do we overcome that? What can parents do? What do you need from parents, from the community, in order to make school a safe and healthy place for scholars?
For parents, we need them to absolutely be advocates and cheerleaders for the young people. They have to bridge that link between what happens at home and what happens at school. You know, pick up the phone, call us, let us know. How can we support you? For our community agencies, partner with the schools. You know, there's so much value that they have in being able to help address our students' needs and maybe even our parents' needs. So really just partnering with us and figuring out what's needed in the schools. You know, come and do workshops. You know, we have what we call holistic forums where we bring in community organizations and we do workshops from bullying to self-esteem to goal setting. You know, partner with schools and come and do this work with us.
We understood that students were facing lots of stresses and we're in crisis in many ways. They're young people. And we heard all of this before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and then we kind of saw it come to light after the pandemic. Just, you know, as reporters, we were heading to all these schools that had fights and that police were going, and the conversation around should police officers be in the schools, it just, the tension, right? I mean, it was just like the temperature really rose around behavior, safety, violence. Did you know, I know you've seen and heard of situations happening around the community. Did you see any changes in behavior specifically in your students last year when they came back?
Yes, so we did see more behavior issues. We didn't necessarily see more fights taking place, especially within the school. We did see it in the community. But I think it had a lot to do with like the restorative practices and really identifying what was going on and being able to bring young people together and have these restorative conversations. Also, MPD helped us tremendously. So they participate in our restorative practices, and especially when we saw issues that were happening with our students in our school in another campus. So again, you know, the whole community piece and being able to be proactive is like really, really important. So it didn't matter that they had the behavior issues or the disagreements. It was really about really having a keen eye on what was going on and being able to immediately step in and try to, again, to identify the problem and resolve the problem.
So even if, and we know that there's been a lot of violence in the streets and affecting our young people.
Yes.
It's being in tune to that and preparing yourself, knowing that maybe someone is coming in with some kind of, you know, trauma or baggage from what just happened the night before.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, we know right now our young people are coming back from a really, really dangerous summer. We know that there was a lot of violence that happened here, you know, in DC alone. And so really making sure, again, starting from the time they walk in that building, we're extra joyful, right? And so you can automatically tell when the student's off, right? That our ears are open, that we're having conversations, that our young people know that we hear them, right? And that we're listening. The other piece is having a lot of activities for them. You know, yesterday we had a student orientation, and I'm telling my students, guess what? Every weekend almost we have football games, right? We're going to be having productions. So really making sure that we plan also even here to have safe space for them to be able to be teenagers, right? And to do whatever they need to do.